So looking at these opening chapters of Candide, I think I've asked you to read the first 11 or 12 chapters. It's a short book, and these chapters are short. And horrible things happen, but somehow it manages to be a breezy read. Um, and one of the things about reading a comedy, and this is certainly a comedy, I mean, it's meant to be funny, is that there's nothing that changes as quickly in history, I think, as humor and what people find funny. I mean, some things maybe stay funny. I don't know, but we're reading something that was written in the 1700s, so it may not be obvious that it's supposed to be funny, but it is. You know, and we won't get all of the. I certainly don't get all of the little jokes, the little puns, the little references. And there's millions of references here to Voltaire's world of the 1700s. Um, but broadly speaking, it's just things you can pick up on. This how even the first chapter description, how Candide was brought up in a magnificent castle, and how he was expelled thence. Well, it wasn't a magnificent castle at all. It was a kind of a pokey little castle in a pokey little place in the provinces, sort of, not a very important place. But part of the humor of this book is people taking themselves too seriously, a lot. People thinking that they're the center of the universe, when it's sort of clear that they're not. I mean, none of us are, right? But we have a tendency to think that we're the most important people in the world, and that the place we live is the center of the universe, when we know, if we were to be rational about it, that couldn't be true. So, part of the humor is right there. It's irony. And, the thing about irony is either you get it or you don't. And we don't always get it, right? So, a lot of this is tongue in cheek. A lot of it is Voltaire telling the story in a not so serious way. And that's why it's so jarring when these horrible things happen to people. But maybe that's what he was getting at. Candide is this young man who's an optimist, right? And we have a certain explanation about what that word actually means, or what it meant in the 18th century to be an optimist. Optimist in the sense of optimal, and optimal in the sense of best. And best in the sense of best of all possible worlds. And that's the thing that we get right away. Candide has a teacher who, tells him that this is the best of all possible worlds. And he says, okay, Dr. Pangloss, I guess Pangloss is smart, so this must be the best of all possible worlds. Now, that is an idea which is actually quite a serious idea that I associate at least with Leibniz, the, I guess, 17th century philosopher, maybe early 18th, but I think, mid to late 17th, who had an argument, that this must be the best of all possible worlds, a theological argument, and maybe we can talk about that eventually, but it's kind of a serious idea. But if there's anything that Voltaire is trying to tear down, it's the idea that we actually live in the best of all possible worlds. There's this wonderful, horrible scene, where, Candide is sort of dragooned into the army of some petty prince, and then, he's, and then he's punished for running away or whatever, and and he says, eventually, this is here at the end of chapter 2, Candide, able to bear no more, begged as a favor that they would be so good as to shoot him. I mean, this is horrible, because they're like whipping him and beating him, and he's just basically, could you just shoot me now? And he, at one point, I don't know where, he says, if this is the best of all possible worlds, I hate to see the other ones, because this seems really bad. So I'm sorry, I'm sure you'll find it when you read through it, but that's just one of the funniest parts of it. This is, oh my goodness, if this is the best of all possible worlds, what must the other ones be like? So, I mean, it's a story, right? And you know, he had right away where he's just thrust in, in this breathless pace, thrust into these adventures where he's basically kidnapped into the army, and he's still in love with with Kunigand, his girl that he's in love with, and he's been kicked out because he's been caught with her by her parents, and he's not aristocratic enough. It makes fun of aristocrats. It makes fun of everybody. And it's just, it's horrible. It's quite horrible. Poor old Pangloss when he meets him again, he's already sort of dying of syphilis. I mean, Voltaire is just absolutely merciless, those characters, But, syphilis in those days had no cure. It was pretty much fatal, and had some of the worst symptoms long term you can possibly imagine. I think one of the cures, so called, was arsenic. I mean, which would probably kill you quicker than the syphilis. I mean, it was a rough world, man. Oh yeah, and then there's the Lisbon earthquake, which was a huge event in the 1700s, when there was an earthquake that basically flattened the city of Lisbon in Portugal. Again, all these, Voltaire basically just laying it on so thick about how could this be the best of all possible worlds. People were beaten, die of these horrible diseases, and then the whole city is flattened, and all these innocent people are crushed to death, and all this suffering. Oh God. Well, and then the old woman, when he meets the old woman, he meets Kunigand again, and this is where it gets really serious, right? I would say, when the old Kunigand tells her story, and here's the part with, I don't know, the anti-Semitic part. I mean, I don't know. I'm not defending it. It very well may be anti-Semitic about these two men who basically both want to keep Kunigand as a mistress. One repeatedly referred to as the Jew or a Jew, Don Issachar. And it's just, it's jarring to see something like that. And of course, maybe can't overlook the fact that Kunigand is being treated like a piece of property. And then Candide. So Candide is a nice guy, but he ends up killing a lot of people, sort of not intentionally so much. It just sort of ends up killing people. And then I guess the history of the old woman. The old woman is another harsh thing. The old woman. Her story is just horrible. I mean, and one of the things she says is that, but this time they're on the boat, getting the heck out of Europe, one step ahead of the law. And one thing she says, and she looks around to people on the ship, she said, if you ask any of these people who had the worst suffering, they always say it was them, because everyone thinks their suffering is the worst, that they've gone through the worst pain and suffering. But let me tell you something. I know. And she tells her story, which is just horrible, horrible story. And, it's not funny, her story at all. But it's, it lays it on about Voltaire talking about human suffering and how much people go through. And again, he says relentlessly criticizing this idea of optimism, in the sense of the world we live in must be the best of all possible worlds. And Voltaire just basically saying what a basically psychotic thought that is, considering how horrible the world is. Now, whether the world is really that horrible, I don't know. This world of Candide is a pretty rough world.